And now to our second plenary talk. We have got a wonderful talk set up by Laura van Knippenberg. She is a digital transformation consultant at Capgemini Invent. Her title, The State of Play of Open Data in Europe, will look at the European Union's data portal and how it has developed year on year. Laura herself is the lead researcher for the data.europa.eu portal since 2020, overseeing their annual open data maturity assessment. So over to you, Laura.
All right, thank you for the introduction, and hi everyone. Thank you all for being here today. As has already been mentioned, I'm part of the data.europa.eu team, and I will take some time today to tell you about the state of play of open data in Europe. So at the EU Open Data Days, the upcoming days, we of course celebrate the progress of open data in Europe, and I can imagine that you're also very curious to hear about best practices, reuse cases, and other kinds of examples. And I'm also very excited about that. But to help you put that a little bit into context, I'm very happy to give you an introduction into open data in Europe by, first of all, looking back a little bit on past developments, looking at the current status of open data practices by means of the open data maturity assessment, and by looking ahead. Well, first of all, by looking back on the legal context a little bit more in Europe regarding open data, which started more or less with the directive on the reuse of public sector information in 2003. Then in 2013 came the amendment to the directive, and in 2019, the new directive on open data and the reuse of PSI came into force, which is now mostly known as the Open Data Directive. So that's a bit from a legal context. Now, in between these first two directives, the first national efforts were launched in form of national portals to make public sector information available. And for example, these are mentioned on the slides are the French National Data Portal in 2011 and the Spanish one in 2012. And since then, many more have followed. Now, to support the ongoing efforts into making data available, also on a European level, some support structures came into force. So in 2012, with the launch of the EU Open Data Portal, the data from EU institutions could be easily findable. And to also further support the national efforts, the European Data Portal launched in 2015, which made the data from all of the national portals easily discoverable. Now, these two are, since this year, merged into one with the launch of data.europa.eu. And data.europa.eu is now the single point of access for both the European data from EU institutions as well as the national data providers. And beyond the portal itself, it's a much broader program in which we aim to support the supply of good quality data, and also support the open data community and foster reuse. But if you want to hear more about data.europa.eu, there will be a dedicated session at 3:50 today. So I would recommend joining that one. But as part of the many support and research activities, one of them is the annual Open Data Maturity Assessment, which we actually started performing since 2015, so since the launch of the European Data Portal, and we are still doing today. So, like I said, that's an annual assessment in which we each year benchmark open data performance across Europe. And this assessment includes the EU member states, but also EFTA countries such as Norway or Switzerland, Eastern Partnership countries such as Ukraine, but also candidate countries and the UK. And why do we do this? Well, of course, to get a better sense of the current state of open data practices, but also to enable countries to track their progress over time. And not just their own progress over time, but also compare their practices to other countries. And this way, we aim to challenge the national open data teams to improve and learn from other countries' best practices. Now, how do we perform the assessment? We ask the national open data teams, often via the public sector information expert group contacts, to fill out a very elaborate self-assessment questionnaire on the 4 dimensions of open data maturity. And I will get to that in a second. But each dimension consists of an elaborate set of questions in the survey that are scored based on, of course, the chosen answer option, but also additional information that is provided as evidence, such as, for example, use cases that are developed in a country. And all of this will be used to eventually calculate the maturity score for a country. Now, these 4 dimensions are open data policy, open data portal, impact, and quality. And each of these dimensions consists of several sub-dimensions. And I would like to go through them very quickly. So the policy, of course, looks into the policy framework, the open data strategies that are in place, the governance models to ensure the execution of the open data strategies. The portal dimension looks into the more technical aspects of things. So think of the portal features and enhanced usability tracking or making improvements to the portals. And then the open data impact dimension, I want to highlight this a little bit because impact is very difficult to estimate and to calculate. And for the purpose of the assessment, we are really looking into the extent to which there is a focus on a national level to understand the way in which open data is reused and how impact is created. And you can think of impact studies that are executed in several different impact areas, such as political, social, environmental, or economic impact. And of course, the last dimension is the quality of data, where we consider the extent to which monitoring or certain measures are in place to ensure the quality of the data and the metadata. Like I said, we track the progress since 2015. And in 2018, an update was implemented to the methodology to include these 4 different dimensions. And what is evident is that since 2018, we can see increase in the overall maturity scores, and especially in 2015, a big leap forward. And as a sneak peek into the upcoming 2021 report, which will be published this December, I can already share with you some of the insights of this year's assessment. And here we can see that on average, this year also the maturity across the countries increased, but the progress seems to be a little bit flattening since this huge leap forward in 2020. And this can in part be attributed to also the pandemic, which really brought about a renewed emphasis on systematically collecting and publishing data of high quality to the public. Now, when we zoom in a little bit on the dimensions, we can see that compared to 2020, all dimensions show an improvement compared to last year, showing the ongoing efforts by the member states. And especially the impact dimension really experienced the largest improvement, with an increase of 6 percentage points compared to last year. So there is an increasing interest in monitoring and measuring the open data reuse and the impact that it generates. And this is one of the more important insights from this year's report, because in the end, impact creation through open data and open data use and reuse can be considered the ultimate goal of all of the efforts put in terms of our open data practices. Because we want, of course, as a basis to have the right policies and governance models in place. We want to have advanced portals in which the data is findable and interaction between data publishers and reusers is fostered. And of course, we want this data to be of such a quality that reuse is made easier, so that in the end, impact can be created. And what we can tell from this year's assessment is that especially the higher scoring countries are doing exceptionally well in that regard. And on the next slide, we can see the ranking and the clustering of the countries, but I seem to see that there is something not working well on the slide. But I can tell you, of course, in the voiceover. What we could see is that especially the higher scoring countries are really close to each other and concentrated at the higher end of the spectrum. And in this year's assessment, after having been part of the trendsetter group, which is the highest scoring group, for I believe 7 years in a row, this year France is leading the ranking for the first time. And they are followed by Ireland, Spain, Poland, and Estonia, who all retained their trendsetter position since last year. And also what we do as part of the assessment is we cluster the countries in different groups. So we cluster them as the beginners group, a followers group, the fast trackers group, and trendsetters. And we do this exercise, this clustering exercise, to enable the national teams to find comparable countries, to start collaborations with and learn from each other. And also for each of these clusters, the upcoming Open Data Maturity Report will contain specific recommendations for improving their open data practices that are relevant for the current position of a country. And then finally, when looking a little bit ahead on what to expect, we of course first would like to ask you to stay tuned for the publication of the full report in early December, in which you can read the full country ranking and all of the research results, as well as many best practices and examples. Then in February, data.europa.eu will host a webinar in which the top performing countries, or the countries who have shown the greatest increase in their score, will share their best practices. And now, as we could see that the scores of the countries are really concentrated at the higher end of the spectrum, we also are planning to do an updated methodology of the assessment itself, as we can really see that the countries are nearing the maximum score of the current assessment. And we want to continue to reflect the latest developments and further improvements in open data practices. And now, as the final note, these further improvements in the open data field, we foresee them to hopefully lead us in reaching the open data goals in Europe by having the right policies and governance models in place to execute the open data strategies well, to have advanced data portals where interaction between data publishers and reusers is fostered. We want to have high quality data and metadata to ensure interoperability and ease of use and reuse of the data, all, of course, in order to ensure the creation of impact, whether that is social, economical, environmental impact through open data use and reuse. At that, I would like to close the session for today. Thank you very much for your time and wishing you happy Open Data Days.
Thank you so much, Laura. Now we've got, again, a number of questions coming in. Beatriz Fernandez asks, how is the impact of the open data initiatives in Europe measured?
In the assessment, we ask the countries to what extent they put in efforts to measure the impact. And in the countries, this is done via research that is conducted at national levels, but also, for example, on the national portals, there are several ways in which countries try to get a better understanding of the level of reuse of their open data. So you can think of the extent to which certain data sets are downloaded, and if there is any kind of discussion that allows for people that have downloaded and reused the data to share how they reused that data. And this can also be done, for example, on by means of showcases, parts of a website in which reuse cases are highlighted and further explained to the users.
Thank you. And one final question, because I know we're slightly over time. So again, you can send your questions directly to Laura through Swapcard. A question here from Simon Steuer. Is there a platform to exchange good initiatives on national or regional level?
I would say that is one that is in the making. So we are planning as Dataeuropa.eu to set up a collaboration channel in which we want to invite the national representatives, but also representatives from EU institutions to come together and share their best practices and also ask each other questions and more directly start discussions and potentially start further collaborations from there.
Laura, thank you so much for your time. And for all of our viewers, just go to the portal, ask the questions directly to Laura, and I'm quite sure she'll respond as quickly as she can. Thank you so much for your interesting talk.